Right now, a secret is out that changes everything we thought we knew about royal coverage. Just this week, a veteran broadcaster accidentally revealed on live television that she was being guided by a hidden hand. What I'm sharing with you today isn't being covered by mainstream outlets. This is exclusive information that you won't hear anywhere else. Before I tell you how deep this goes, you need to hit subscribe right now. This story is developing fast, and if you're not subscribed, you'll miss the next update. Let me ask you straight. Do you believe the media tells you the truth about the royal family, or are we all being managed? Tell me in the comments right now. What I'm about to share isn't speculation, it's documented proof that has finally surfaced. It reveals a calculated campaign to manipulate public perception through mainstream media outlets. The evidence we've been waiting for is here, and it's more damaging than anyone imagined. If you've been paying attention, you already knew something was off. You felt it in your gut. For years, we've all wondered how some public figures get consistently favorable media coverage. We've suspected there might be people behind the scenes pulling strings, but suspicions aren't proof. Now we have proof. This week, during a live broadcast, something remarkable happened. A veteran broadcaster with decades of experience accidentally revealed the truth about how she was influenced to give favorable coverage. She didn't mean to expose it. It slipped out during what should have been a routine call from a viewer. But once those words were out, there was no taking them back. The game was up. But here's where it gets interesting. Let me set the scene. A caller phoned in, thanking the host for not discussing certain controversial figures. The caller was pleased that coverage had shifted away from criticism. It was meant to be a light moment, but the host's response was extraordinary. Instead of simply accepting the compliment, she became defensive. She needed everyone watching to know that she had never been critical in the first place. And in her eagerness to prove her balanced approach, she revealed something she shouldn't have. She mentioned receiving a message from someone closely connected to one of these public figures. This person, who acts as an unofficial spokesperson and media liaison, had complimented her coverage. But here's the shock. According to the broadcaster, this message didn't just praise her work. It specifically stated that the public figure in question had been watching and was delighted with how she was being portrayed. Think about that for a moment. A direct line of communication from a media operative to a mainstream broadcaster, with explicit confirmation that the subject was monitoring coverage and expressing pleasure when it met their approval. Is that how independent journalism is supposed to work? Journalists aren't supposed to receive feedback from the people they're covering about whether their coverage is pleasing. That's not balanced reporting, that's coordination, that's manipulation, that's the kind of thing that undermines public trust in media institutions. But it gets worse, because this wasn't an isolated incident. The evidence suggests this was part of a broader pattern, a systematic campaign to influence multiple broadcasters and journalists across different outlets. Sources reveal that the same media operative who contacted this broadcaster had apparently been in touch with others as well. Young correspondents, eager to build their careers and grateful for any attention from well-connected sources, were particularly susceptible. They would receive compliments, words of encouragement, subtle suggestions that they were being noticed by important people, and slowly their coverage would shift. They would become more sympathetic, more willing to present one side of the story while downplaying or ignoring contradictory information. Let me stack the evidence for you. First, the operative reached out to multiple journalists. Second, he targeted those early in their careers. Third, he used praise as a tool. Fourth, he offered subtle guidance. Fifth, he monitored their coverage. Sixth, he rewarded favorable portrayals. Seventh, he isolated those who resisted. Think about what this means. It means an entire network of influence working behind the scenes. This isn't the first time we've seen this play out. Remember Princess Diana? She faced a media machine that shaped narratives, often with cruel precision. She was hounded, misrepresented, and ultimately failed by the very institutions meant to inform the public. Are we watching history repeat itself? Think of her sons who have had to grow up under this same distorted lens. How is that fair? If you've been following royal news for years, you've seen this pattern before. One particularly troubling example involves how this media operative was used to attack credible journalists who refused to play along. Take a respected biographer, someone who had spent years researching, and had been granted extensive access to write authoritative books about the royal family. She had credibility, she had sources, she knew what she was talking about, and that made her dangerous to people who wanted to control the narrative. So what happened? She was ambushed on live television by presenters who suddenly turned hostile, questioning her integrity and suggesting she was spreading unfounded rumors. This wasn't normal interviewing, this was coordinated character assassination. The biographer was devastated by the experience. She refused to appear on certain programs for a considerable time afterward, and looking back now with what we know about the behind-the-scenes manipulation, it's clear what was happening. Presenters were being encouraged, perhaps directly or perhaps through subtle messaging, to challenge and undermine anyone who presented an inconvenient narrative. If you were willing to provide favorable coverage, you received compliments and insider access. If you were critical or simply truthful when the truth was unflattering, you were targeted. Another broadcaster was publicly called out and labeled in derogatory terms simply for expressing skepticism. This is a tactic we've seen before. If you can't refute the message, attack the messenger. Make them seem unreasonable, biased, or motivated by personal animosity. Never mind if they're actually just doing their job as journalists. Never mind if the facts support their reporting. The goal is to intimidate them into silence, or at least to make other journalists think twice before following their example. What makes this particularly insidious is the use of a supposed journalist as the go-between. This individual has written books positioning himself as an insider with special access and knowledge. He claims to be a real journalist doing real reporting, but the evidence suggests he's actually functioning as an unofficial publicist, managing media coverage on behalf of specific individuals while maintaining the pretense of independence. That's not journalism. That's public relations masquerading as journalism, and it's deeply dishonest to the public who consume his work thinking they're getting objective reporting. Experts confirm that this behavior breaches every ethical standard in the profession. This same individual has a history of sicking online mobs on people who displease him or his associates. There are documented instances of him reposting critical comments or drawing attention to people who had said something unflattering, knowing full well that his followers would then harass and attack those individuals. When confronted about this, he plays the victim, claiming he's the one being unfairly targeted. It's a classic deflection technique. Do something terrible, then complain loudly when people call you out for it, hoping that the controversy over the call-out will overshadow the original wrongdoing. I've been tracking this pattern for months, and it's clear. Trust me on this, it's bigger than one broadcaster. Now, some of you might be thinking, this is just how modern media works. Everyone has their preferred journalists. Everyone tries to build relationships with reporters who might cover them favorably. Public figures have always had publicists and media strategists. And you're right to a point, there's nothing inherently wrong with media relations. But there's a line between legitimate public relations and coordinated manipulation. There's a difference between making yourself available to journalists and secretly directing coverage while pretending you have no involvement. The key issue here is the deception. If a broadcaster wants to be sympathetic to particular public figures, that's their choice. But they should be honest about it. They shouldn't pretend to be offering objective analysis when they're actually receiving guidance and approval from the subjects of their coverage. The public deserves to know when they're watching opinion and advocacy rather than independent journalism. And journalists deserve to know when their colleagues are compromising the integrity of the profession by secretly coordinating with the people they're supposed to be covering. What's particularly striking in this case is the timing of some of these media manipulations. According to the evidence, this campaign to influence coverage continued even during a period of national mourning following the death of Britain's longest-serving monarch in 2022. Think about how calculated that is. Even at a moment when you might expect some restraint, some respect for the gravity of the situation, the media management continued. Favorable coverage was still being cultivated. Critical voices were still being targeted. The machine never stopped running. This tells us something important about the people involved in this operation. It tells us that controlling the narrative was more important to them than almost anything else. It was a priority even during circumstances when most people would step back and let events speak for themselves. That level of obsession with media coverage suggests deep insecurity. It suggests an understanding that the truth, if allowed to emerge without management and spin, would be damaging. How dare they use a time of national grief to push their agenda? And we've seen the fruits of this media manipulation campaign. We've watched as organizations that were once skeptical shifted to become defenders. We've seen how certain broadcasters went from questioning obvious inconsistencies to describing questionable publicity stunts in glowing terms. The transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because of sustained effort to influence coverage through a network of compliments, access, and subtle pressure. The media operative at the center of this has now pivoted to writing fiction. That's actually quite fitting when you think about it, because much of what he's presented as factual reporting over the years has been heavily shaped by the agendas of his sources rather than objective reality. His latest project is apparently a novel about someone working in a palace press office. One can only imagine how much of it will be thinly veiled commentary on real events presented as fiction, precisely because the factual claims couldn't be substantiated. It's a way to make allegations and shape narratives while hiding behind the defense of creative license. His previous work, which was positioned as a serious biography, has been widely criticized for its obvious bias and lack of journalistic rigor. But it sold well initially because it came out at a moment of intense public interest and because it had the tacit endorsement of the subject through his obvious access to information that could only have come from them. Since then, his credibility has cratered. Subsequent books have flopped. His appearances are increasingly awkward. Even the friendly broadcasters who once welcomed him are starting to keep their distance. When your entire career is built on proximity to specific individuals and those individuals become increasingly unpopular, your own stock inevitably falls. But let's return to the central revelation because I don't want this to get lost in the broader context. A mainstream broadcaster admitted on live television that she received a message telling her that a controversial public figure was pleased with her coverage. She said this proudly, as if it was evidence of her balance and fairness, but actually it's evidence of the opposite. It's evidence that she was in communication, directly or indirectly, with the subject of her reporting, and that subject was monitoring and expressing opinions about her work. That is completely inappropriate in any legitimate journalistic context. Imagine if a political correspondent admitted that a politician they covered had sent them a message saying how pleased they were with recent articles. That journalist would be laughed out of the newsroom. They would be accused of being in the pocket of that politician. Their credibility would be destroyed. But somehow, when it comes to celebrity and royal coverage, different standards seem to apply. Journalists can be open about their cozy relationships with their subjects, and nobody bats an eye. Well, some of us are batting our eyes. Some of us think this matters. After the broadcast, the internet erupted. Some viewers are furious, calling for accountability. Others defend the broadcaster, saying she was just being polite. But here's what I think. This is a line that should never be crossed. The erosion of journalistic integrity in this area has real consequences. When major media outlets become vehicles for managed narratives rather than independent sources of information, the public loses. We lose the ability to make informed judgments about public figures. We lose trust in institutions that are supposed to hold powerful people accountable. We end up in a situation where substantial portions of the population simply don't believe anything they read or watch because they've seen too many examples of coverage that was clearly compromised. And it's not just about one controversial couple, though they're certainly the focus of this particular scandal. This is about a broader culture in certain corners of the media where access and relationships matter more than truth, where journalists see their role as managing public perception rather than reporting facts, where the line between PR and journalism has become so blurred as to be almost meaningless. We need to talk about the people who enable this kind of manipulation. The editors who assign stories to journalists they know are compromised. The producers who book guests they know will provide favorable commentary in exchange for continued access. The executives who prioritize ratings and clicks over accuracy and integrity. They all share responsibility for the degradation of journalism we're witnessing. They all contribute to the environment where media operatives can successfully manipulate coverage across multiple outlets simultaneously. There's also a generational aspect to this that's worth examining. Younger journalists entering the industry are often more vulnerable to this kind of manipulation because they're still building their careers and networks. They're grateful for any attention or encouragement from people who seem well connected. They don't necessarily have the experience or confidence to recognize when they're being played. And once they've been compromised, once they've accepted the praise and adjusted their coverage accordingly, it becomes very difficult to reverse course without admitting they were wrong. So they double down. They become even more defensive of their sources. They attack critics with increasing vehemence to justify their own choices. This is how entire news organizations can shift their coverage over time. It starts with one or two young reporters who get cultivated by media operatives. The coverage becomes noticeably more favorable. Other journalists of the same organization see this and either follow suit or find themselves marginalized. Editors notice which stories get good feedback from important sources and assign more of those stories. Gradually, the entire outlet tilts in one direction. And because this happens slowly over months and years, it's easy to miss unless you're paying close attention. But people are paying attention now. The accidental admission during that live broadcast has focused attention on practices that were previously just suspected. People are going back and looking at coverage with fresh eyes. They're noticing patterns they might have missed before. They're asking questions about relationships between journalists and their sources. They're demanding transparency about potential conflicts of interest. This is healthy. This is what should happen when evidence of media manipulation emerges. The question now is, what comes next? Will there be any accountability for the journalists and broadcasters who allowed themselves to be used in this way? Will news organizations examine their own practices and implement safeguards to prevent this kind of manipulation in the future? Will the media operative at the center of this face any professional consequences for his role in corrupting coverage? Or will everyone just move on and hope the public forgets? My fear is that it will be the latter. Media institutions are notoriously bad at holding themselves accountable. Journalists protect other journalists. Broadcasters don't want to admit their coverage was compromised because it reflects poorly on their judgment and integrity. So there will be some awkward moments, some uncomfortable questions, and then it will all fade away. The same people will continue doing the same things with slightly more discretion. But perhaps I'm being too cynical. Perhaps this revelation will serve as a wake-up call. Perhaps journalists who have been operating with integrity despite pressure to conform will feel emboldened to speak out. Perhaps audiences will become more discerning and demand better from the outlets they consume. Perhaps advertisers and subscribers will vote with their wallets and support only those organizations that demonstrate real commitment to journalistic standards. One thing is certain, though, the truth has a way of emerging eventually. No matter how much effort goes into suppressing or managing it, you can manipulate coverage for a while. You can cultivate friendly journalists and attack critics. You can build an entire infrastructure of media management and narrative control. But eventually someone makes a mistake. Someone says something they shouldn't. Someone's conscience bothers them enough to leak information. And when that happens, the whole carefully constructed edifice starts to crumble. That's what we're seeing now. The admission on live television was just one crack in the dam. But it's an important crack because it confirms what many people suspected but couldn't prove. It validates the instincts of audience members who felt something was off about certain coverage but couldn't quite put their finger on what it was. It provides a foundation for asking harder questions and demanding better answers. So, what should you take away from all this? First, be skeptical of coverage that seems too uniformly positive or negative, especially when it comes to controversial public figures. Ask yourself who benefits from the narrative being presented. Second, pay attention to which journalists seem to have unusual access to particular sources and consider what they might be giving up in exchange for that access. Third, support media outlets and individual journalists who demonstrate independence and integrity, even when their reporting is uncomfortable or unpopular. And fourth, speak up when you notice coverage that seems compromised. Don't assume someone else will say something. Your voice matters. I genuinely care about your opinion on this. This story isn't over. There will be more revelations. There will be more uncomfortable admissions. There will be more evidence of the sophisticated media manipulation campaigns that have been operating behind the scenes. Stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay skeptical of anyone who tells you they have all the answers or that you should simply trust their version of events without question. Before I go, I need you to do something for me. If you found this information valuable, if you think more people need to understand what's really happening with media coverage of public figures, then share this content right now. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg? Do you believe other public figures are running similar media manipulation campaigns? I want to hear from you. And tell me this, are you team truth or team narrative? Drop your answer in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is going to keep developing and you want to stay updated on every new revelation. Hit that like button, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to see it. In the next video, I'll reveal the exact nature of the messages sent to the broadcaster and what they mean for the future of royal reporting. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.